All right, so we are gathered here today to learn about Cypress. Just as a rough idea, has everyone worked with Cypress before, or is it all new to everyone? Sure. Yeah? Cool. All right, so basically we've pulled down the repo. We're just going to run npm install. That's just going to get everything that we need to, but we're not going to do that because we need to go into client first. And then we're going to do npm install. This could take a little while, and then we're going to basically run npx Cypress open. Once this happens, you get this lovely screen that says, "Welcome to Cypress." And it's a really nice tool, and it's one of the reasons why I really enjoy using Cypress, because a lot of it is like tutorial, like wizardy style. So we're going to pick end-to-end testing, and you can see here it's going to create all our files for us. So it's going to create a config.ts file, a end-to-end test file, our commands for supporting us, as well as an example fixture list. So we're going to click continue, and what's going to happen is it's going to break. So what we need to do is we just need to go into client, source, snippets, and we just need to copy the contents of this file into our Cypress config, and that's basically because the latest version of Cypress doesn't really work that well with ES modules, so we basically just have to overwrite and use this old school module export syntax. Click try again, and it'll work. And then what we can do is if we go to our terminal and we start a new terminal, and we basically just say cd client npm run dev. This is going to basically run our front end website in the background. So for those that haven't seen it already, welcome to Getflix, the new streaming service provided by Grant. It's highly extortionate. It's at least about 50 quid a month, and you only get about 3 movies on it, so apologies. So if we go back to the code, we're going to go through how to set up our first tests. Very exciting. So we're going to go back to Cypress. We can click try again, and now it's picked up, and it's going to say which browser would you like to use. So it's picked up that I've got Chrome, I've got Firefox, and it's also picked up that it's got its own browser called Electron, which is basically just a built-in browser that comes shipped with Cypress. It's mainly used for when you're doing like headless, so you can run Cypress in what's in here in our testing lab, but you can also run in what's called headless mode, which is basically just runs in the terminal in its own little virtual environment within the terminal. And it doesn't have all of this like GUI and UI and stuff, which is great for when you want to put it into like pipelines. Just run it in headless state, run it in GitHub and say, right, I want it to go off and run all the integration tests. So we're going to use Chrome, just because that's what we're using. We click start end-to-end testing, which will then open up our Cypress box. And we can sit here, we can go, right, we're going to create a new spec. And in here, we're just going to call this file initial. Okay, that's done that. So now you can see we've got, these are the tests that's pulling in from Cypress end-to-end folder. So if we go back to our IDE, we can see that it's created these 2 new folders. So we've got one called Cypress, and then we've got all these folders of end-to-end, fixtures, support, and then obviously we've got our Cypress config TS that we looked at. And then I've created a TS config, just allow us to use TypeScript in our tests, because Cypress is only kind of really just taken on TypeScript. So it's still, which is why we had the issues with the config at the beginning. So how does a test look? So basically, it comprises of several main elements. So if we look at, if we go to our end-to-end, you can see our test file that it created for us, and you can see the general structure. So you've got describe, so that's basically our, think of describe as your test case container, so that this is everything to do with like an initial test. So if we call it initial tests. I don't know if we call it, we'll just do an initial connection. And this is going to hold everything to do with our initial connection tests. So we can do stuff like it should show a form. And it's basically just a bit of a sanity check to say, yep, my Cypress is hooked up to our application. So we can do that by doing cy.visit. And the cy, this is basically pulled from the Cypress library, and it basically just says that the command that I'm about to chain is a Cypress command. Everything that you do in Cypress will come from that library. As we go through the tutorial, you'll see more and more usages of this. So we're just going to do that. We're just going to do cy.visit, and then we're going to do cy.get. And then we're basically using a selector. Now, the selectors in Cypress are very similar to CSS selectors. So everything like in square brackets, you can use like input with name of X, Y, and Z. In this scenario, we're just going to use form. So we're saying, go to the page, and it uses, Cypress is built on the Mocha testing framework. So what we can do is we can do should and literally do be visible. And that's it. And then basically, if we go back to our test and we click initial, boom, done, it's ran. It ran in 931 milliseconds. So it literally took less than a second to navigate to the app and then look for an item on the page of a form. Now, this is nice, but what happens if you've got two forms on your page? It's just going to say, yep, there's a form on a page. So when you're writing your tests, you want to be a little bit more specific. You want to be saying, I want to know it's loaded this form, or this form is visible, or whatever. And what we can do is we can use data attributes. So there's many ways of doing it, but one of the best practices is using data attributes. So if we go into our registration form and we just scroll down to our form element, which is here, you can see I've added in a data cy, which is basically just a common way of saying this is a Cypress attribute, don't touch it, don't change it in the future. And we're just going to give it a name of registration form. So if we go back to here, what we can do is we can literally just pass in a CSS selector of data /cy equals registration form. And there you go. Now, when we go back to here and we reload the tests usually reload themselves, but you can see that it's found that specific form. So it's the same as writing the form before, but now it's very specific. So if we had two forms on the page, we could have one called registration form and one called, I don't know, account details or something. You can tell it exactly which element to pinpoint, and it just makes your tests a lot less brittle. And that's the other reason why we use the data cy attribute, because if you rely on stuff like class name, so if you add a class, for example, I don't know, registration form in a class, if someone comes along in the future and changes that class name, or if someone comes along in the future and says, oh, we've got a button called with red, I want you to find a red button, and they change that to green button, all your tests will fail. So your tests become brittle. So by using those data cy attributes and the IDs, just makes your test a lot more secure and reliable. Which leads me on to our next thing. So we've done a little basic test where we've done like an initial connection. So these are really handy just to do a quick sanity check to make sure that your app can connect to your service using Cypress and it's working. But then obviously we want to start writing new tests. So we're going to create a new file. Try and keep your describe blocks one per file, or if you want, you could have multiple describe blocks per file, but try and keep them related at least. But I try and keep one to one file. So we're going to do error handling now. And everything gets prefixed with cy, just so that Cypress picks up the test. Otherwise, if you just do error handler.ts and then start writing your tests in it, Cypress won't pick it up. So again, we've got our structure, which is describe, and then we give it a name. So we're going to do error handling tests, and then we're going to get rid of this, and then we can change that to it, and then we're just going to do a test of should not show validation errors on blur only after submit. Quite specific, right? But that's what you want in your test. You want them to test specific test cases, because then we can write all the negative test passes and then we can write all the positive assertions afterwards. So here we've got, let's see if we've got a snippet here. So we've got first error handling. So I'm just going to make my life a bit easier rather than have to type all this out again. I'm just going to shove that in there. So what is this doing? So this is basically, it's going to go off and it's going to find an input with the name full name, an input with the name email, password, confirm password, and then it's going to look for an input with the ID of agree to terms. And then all we're doing is we're focusing, and then straight away we're going to blur. So we're basically testing that if you were to blur out of each individual thing, does an error message show? Because we know that we only want to show the error messages once we've clicked the submit button to avoid anyone just tabbing around and all that kind of stuff. Then what we do is we have cy.contains, and what this does is basically the contains function looks anywhere within the DOM. So it looks anywhere within the DOM for a text that says full name is required. And we're saying that it should not exist in the DOM. So we're not saying it's not visible, we're going one step further and saying this element should not exist in the DOM at all, which is a much better test than just saying it's not visible. Because technically, according to our React code, we're basically saying that if we bring up the registration form again, we're saying here that it should only be in the DOM if the full name has got an error. You know what I mean? So we don't want it to render unnecessary HTML if it doesn't need to. So that's what we're asserting by doing this test of not exist. So if we go back to our Cypress test now, we can focus the test window, and you can see here, we go to the error handling code. It's going to run our test, but it's not working. Why is it not working? Well, because we've forgotten to put cy.visit in. So you always have to tell it, because it's a new file, right? It's a new test file. It doesn't know that it needs to visit the page. So we put in localhost 5173, and now, oh, why did you just put, oh my God, cannot type. So now if we go back to our test, you can see it's navigated to the page, it's looked for our input, it's focused it, it's blurred it, it's gone on to the next page. And this is the beauty of Cypress. You've got a screenshot of and a snapshot of every single command that you're telling it to do. So if there's an error and it comes up and it says, whoa, your test's failed, you can go through and you can see line by line why it's failed. You know what I mean? So it's just really, really handy. Our next test we can do is we can do show errors on submit. So basically this test, we move this into here. What are we doing? Did I not copy all of it? Yeah, that's fine. So now we've basically got our other test to say, right, go in, find the submit button, and then submit the test basically. So again, go in here, and it can't find this CY submit because we haven't added it. But it's telling you automatically that it's tried to find this element, but it can't find it. And that's because, once again, we forgot to put the cy.visit in. Getting a bit of repetitive, isn't it? Having to put this cy.visit in all the time. It's getting a bit annoying because I keep forgetting about it. So what we're going to do is you can use a really nice function called forEach. And what this does is you can put it in before each test, you can put it in your describe block, and it's basically going to say, before every test in this file, I want you to go to localhost 5173, and then you can basically take it out of here, which means before every test, it's going to go off and it's going to be able to navigate to that page, and it just can't find this. But now it's telling us again, it can't find this ID because we just haven't put it in yet. But you can see how handy it is that feedback that it's got is just so much easier knowing that I've probably typed this wrong. And that's because it needs to be click. Submit is obviously if you're accessing the form, whereas obviously we're trying to access the button and we're trying to call submit on a button rather than submit on the actual form, so we need to click the button. So you can see now, it's now passing. So we've got should not show errors on blur, and then this is failing because it expected a password to have a length of 2 but got 1. So what it's doing here is it's checking that you should have please enter your password, and then you've got please enter your password. Well, that's wrong because it should say please confirm your password or please enter your confirmed password. And that's why automation testing can be really helpful, because we've already picked up a fault just by literally within less than a couple of seconds. We've found that, oh, actually, somebody's not put the right error message in the code. So obviously if we go back into the code and we change that error message to, where has it gone? Please confirm your password. And again, Cypress will automatically, you can configure it, to automatically watch your tests and rerun your tests and stuff. So that should come back as 1 now. Sorry, the test is wrong. The test should be 1 as well. And there you go. Automatically rerun the test, and you see it all passes now. But you can see how fast it is. Like again, less than 336 milliseconds to test those 2 test cases, which kind of leads me on to my next point. You don't want to keep writing all these out, right? You don't have to like write all these different scenarios. What happens if you want to test whether the password is blurred and this isn't blurred, and if I type something in there and I don't type something there, it can get really repetitive. So what we can do is you can use the forEach loop. So if we go into here, what I tend to do is I tend to create like an array of test cases. So you can see here I've got a name, and basically that's the name of the test. So we've got missing email and password. I want to fill, so what I tend to do is I create like an object of the things that I want to type into. So give it a name of like full name, and I want to type in Bruce Rain into the full name, but I'm not going to type in an email or password. And then what I do is I give expected errors. So basically these are the errors that I want to check in my form. So I want to check that it shows, please confirm your password, please enter your password, email is required, all that kind of stuff. And then what I can do is I can copy this into my test file. Just one comment. That. Import that. Get rid of that. Now what we're doing here is this is a really nice way to basically get rid of all this code. So we could just get rid of all that if we wanted to. And now what we're doing is we're going to destruct the test cases that we've just had in the other file to pull out the name, the fill, and the expected errors. And then for each of those test cases, I want you to create a new test where we're going to basically use interpolation to say, shows the correct errors when, and then the name will be when name is missing, when such and such. And then we're basically just checking to say, if you've told me to write a full name, find that full name, and then do type whatever I've told you to type in there. Then at the end, just click the submit button, and then basically we're going to loop through all of the expected errors and check that that error exists within the registration form. And again, this is the really key point of saying we're going to check that it's only within that form. We're not bothered about everything else in the DOM. We only want to know that on this form is that error visible. So if we go through now and we refresh that page, you can see it's just spiraling through all the test cases, and you've ran 3 test cases of different combinations of those inputs in less than 3 seconds. That's fast, right? But again, we can go in, we can cycle through them, see what it's doing, but it's so much faster than having to write out a test per scenario. You can just put all your scenarios and then go, boom, run through this. And it's just being clever with your JavaScript. It's just being clever with your code to be like, how can I make this reusable functions? The same as we don't want to keep filling the form out. So if we wanted to, we could say, well, actually, I'll just create a fill form function that basically says, here you go, run this fill form, job done, go off. But we all know we've got things like APIs involved, right? Whenever you've got something, you always know that like, oh, I'll actually, this is going to hit an API at some point. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how Cypress can handle this opposed to other testing platforms. So like you may have heard of like things like Selenium, terrible testing library, mainly because it doesn't know how to handle asynchronous requests very well. It'll do stuff like you have to like arbitrary awaits on it and say, well, I want you to wait for 5 seconds in case there's a response. And it ends up bloating all of your tests. Cypress has built-in functionality to be able to just wait for that fetch request to come back. If you put in a check after the API call has been made, it'll wait for the API call to finish before it checks if that element is on the page. I'm going to show you how this works. So what we're going to do is I'm going to get all of the API logic, which should be in here somewhere. So at the top of our page, we're just going to update this submit logic to basically hit our API. And then we're going to add our connections, a little string in here. So all I'm doing here is I'm just going to add a little message so that when we get a message back from our API, we can show it on the page and you can see how this works. So we've got our onSubmit method here, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to go into our server and get that running. So we're just going to do cd server, cd server, run npm install, and then we're basically just going to start running our Express API. It's just a really basic and simple API. I can quickly show you it if you want. It's basically just localhost 5432. Pretty sure I did it for 5432, or was it 4321? Knew it was something like that. And you just basically say that you can see the API is running. We haven't got any GET requests mapped to it, but if we now click, if we just fill this in with some test data, and we click submit. Oh no, it's not a real email address. we go to inspect, we should see a network request if this is working. So there you go, we've got a response back from basically saying registration successful. I think we just haven't hooked it up right on the front end. Yeah, so we just need to add in our status message. So we're just going to say if status message, add in a little p tag, just to say, tell us the status message basically. Ta-da! So you can see that we've got an API request set up. So how do we actually test, how do we go about testing this in our API app? Well, again, we will set up a new end-to-end file called api.cy.ts, and we'll have a describe API tests. And then in here, we can basically create our API tests. So again, like I prepared earlier, and we're just saying it should show a sign up successful message on post to API. So again, got our helper message, our helper functions, because we don't have to keep writing out, fill out the form. And all we're doing is going to navigate, click the link, and then we're going to check to see if registration complete should be visible. So when we go back to our Cypress tests, and we go to API, done. That is it. You don't need anything else. And that is the beauty of Cypress. You don't need to sit and plug in middleware. You don't need to sit and say, I want you to click the link and then wait 10 seconds for the API to do something and bring back a response. It'll just wait itself because we've told it to look for something after the thing's been clicked. So you can see here it's clicked the link, it's made a fetch request, it's waiting for that fetch to come back, and then it's checking to see whether this DOM element exists, which it does. We just can't see it. I don't know why. I mean, it says it's visible, but I can't see it. Probably because of some styling or something. If the response is okay, registration complete. Sometimes Cypress does this weird thing where it says it can see something, but it just has, there you go. Just needed to click on the thing. So it is there, so I just hadn't clicked on the test part. And that's as easy as it is, but what if you don't, what happens if you have a resource and you're running this on the dev environment and you're like, well, I don't want my API to keep getting spammed because it's going to cost me a lot of money if I'm running 100 tests and actually hitting my live API. So what we can do is we can mock it. So if we pull in this test, what we can do is we can mock or we can intercept the actual network request. So what we can do is we can say cy.intercept post, so intercept any post request that goes to this endpoint. Now obviously best practice, I'd probably remove all my routes into a TS document and then basically list all the routes, and then you can use more, rather than trying to use magic strings here, if the endpoint changes, for example, you only got to change it in one place, you can just go to a TS file and say routes dot, so then that would actually become like routes dot register or something, you know what I mean, rather than being a magic string that you then have to go and update in 20 million different places. And then we're going to basically simulate this response. So we're saying intercept the response, intercept the post request to this endpoint and return a 200 response. This is the body that I want you to mock. But then what we're going to do is we're going to add a delay of a second. And this is really like, you don't need this. Like you could take that out if you wanted to. The problem with that is it then doesn't really give like a true to life example, because basically what Cypress will do is you click the button, bang, you'll have a response. So, but you can use this to maybe say, well, I want to do an integration test where I'm in the middle of, I don't know, middle of a supermarket and I've got shit signal. So what they can do is you can say, well, actually, I'll put a delay on of 5 seconds. What happens if I put a delay of 5 seconds, or if I put 30-second delay on the request? Does my app handle timeouts? Does it give the user a really nice error message? If I was using loading spinners, I could put a delay of maybe 10 seconds on it to show, okay, yep, a loading spinner does actually show when it's loading or doing something in the background. So it just helps you have that better control. And then what we do is we give it an alias. So we're basically saying here, treat this request and call it post register, which allows us to later on wait for something to happen. So you can see here we're visiting localhost 5173. We're calling our like a fill form, basically. You're saying that you've got our helper. We're going to submit the form using our selector. And then this is the important part. What we're doing is we're going to wait for the mocked request to complete. We're using the cy.wait function. And you basically just prefix it with an @ symbol, and that basically means that you're waiting for this alias that we've created up here. So if you wanted to, you can actually, say you have a, I don't know, say you've got an API that sends off multiple like requests to the same API endpoint, or if it you could set up like the first request, I want it to do this, but on the second request, I want it to do this. You can then wait for your specific request. So if it sends off multiple posts to register, but one's got like an ID with it, one hasn't got an ID with it, you could configure it to say, well, on the first request, when you don't send an ID, I want you to return a 500. But then on the second request, when you do send an ID, for example, I want you to do this. And I want to wait for this one first, do this, wait for another one, do this. And then right at the bottom, we're just basically saying, after you've waited, make sure that the registration successful is there, because that's basically what we've told it to return from our mock, not what's in the code. So if we look at that and how that runs, now it's going to say registration complete, not registration successful. And that's because I'll have done something wrong. There'll be something that I'll have missed. Yeah, because I've hard-coded the value. So if you wanted to, you'd change that to sort of response dot. Change that to like response dot body dot whatever it is. I imagine you'd probably need to. Because it's going to be. Feel free to help out if you can think of. Yeah. I think it's because it's not typed. Yeah. But yeah, you get the message. If you put in the response body, it'll type out what it needs to, and then the test will pass. But that is the be all and end all of it. Basically, you can then mock whatever you want in there. That's pretty much it. Any questions or anything that you'd like me to go through, or? Yeah. I mean, this is the beauty of Cypress. It is lightning fast. Like I say, you can do so much with it. Just the fact that you can write tests pretty quickly. There's so much stuff there. Like, I mean, there's other ways that you can write like tidier code. So, for example, I'll try and show you. I've got some examples of, like here, for example, if we were going back, if we went back to our error handling. So you know you've got like, where's it gone? Where's it gone? Don't know where it's gone now. Let's just put this test back in. So now we had this like really like this like cy.contains, and we were like checking each individual thing. What we can do is we can actually we can make it a little bit tidier by using a function called within, and it basically adds a scope to the test. So what we can do is we can say, I want you to go through and do all this stuff, but I only want you to check for these things within the scope of this form. So you know, like before we were doing cy.get, before we were doing basically something like this, and then putting like contains on the end. So we had that before, but basically that's like, go and find this, contains, go find this, contains. Whereas by simply building our scope, we can say, go off and get the form once, and then while you've got it, go and check to make sure that all this is within that scope. So again, it's just a bit of a nicer, tidier way of writing your code, but it also means that you know you can't ever escape that scope. So it helps you, it allows you to see that, oh, wait a minute, I've got the full name, but for some reason it's not inside my form. So it's on the page, but it's not within my form. So it's, again, that extra layer of specificity, whatever that word is, to basically be really specific and say it's got to be within this form. Yeah, it would. It would probably it would make your test a bit faster, mainly just because you're not grabbing things more. Yeah, exactly. You're not going off and getting the thing, doing something with it, getting the thing, doing it with it, and it's just a lot more performance. You can see if we went back to our tests, if we go to error handling, we're now down to 170 milliseconds. Yeah, exactly. It was like 3 seconds something, and it's because we were going off and saying, go off, get the thing, test it, get the thing, test it, and just by that simple tweak, just to say, go off and get it once, now while you've got it, check all this stuff, you can half your time down to 100, and you imagine how long it would take you to manually go in and go, right, click, tab, and it just makes your testing so much more robust, because the same conditions are going to be run every single time. There's no deviation of, oh, well, actually, that time I clicked it and then I tabbed and then I waited 5 seconds and then tabbed again. Like, you know that it's consistently going to be testing the same thing. That's the beauty of automation testing, right? But while we've got a couple of minutes, I'll just show you a bit more about the IDE. So say you sat there and you're like, oh, is there an ID on this field? I don't know. What you can do is you can go into Cypress and click this little button. And then if you hover over, it'll give you the selector for that attribute. So you can go over and you can say, well, I want to know, I don't know, registration form, nth child. Some of them are good, some of them are not great. But you can see here, it's like, I want you to go off and get the third child of the form. I think if you drop down, you can do like, it gives you like examples of like other selectors. So you can test your selector in there. So you can do like cy.get and then form. If you want to test to see like, oh, well, if I type in, what is it, data cy equals submit. You can see, like, you can test your selectors without having to go into your code, write the selector, and then run the test, and it's like, oh, it's failed. Or if you see me being a bit more experimental with your testing, you think, oh, actually, like, is it better for me to use this one because it's a little bit easier to read or not? You can just go into this you can go into the tool and basically just type in your selector and it'll tell you, and then you can literally click copy to keyboard, print to console. It's just handy. And then, yeah, just click through and do what you want. You can view, you can actually do videos. So we've turned videos off just for the purpose of the test. But if we go into our Cypress config, if you turn videos on to true, what happens is it'll run the test, and then I believe in one of these somewhere, I think you have to give it you might have to tell it where you want it to output, but basically it'll create a video file of the test running, and then basically you could, if you wanted to, say for example your client has needs evidence or proof, you can basically just attach the video and say, here you go, here's the video, it proves it works. It's also really good for testing teams if say they're trying to report back to the developers and say, oh, it doesn't work, the tests fail, like most testers do. So if you've got evidence of the of the video, you can get the video and you can send it back to the developer and say, look, it doesn't work, this is what it's doing, this is how to replicate it. It just makes it a lot easier for everyone. The testers don't have to spend ages trying to think, what were the steps that I did to replicate this test? They literally write an automation test, get the video to do it, and then send across the video. You can turn video false all the time, but then if you do want to replicate, and it's quite a long process, turn video on, video the test, and then send it across to someone. Just makes your life 10 times easier.
Is that video like the speed that it goes through?
Yeah.
Or is it like slow down?
I think you can configure it, but you can.
Some of them are quite,
Yeah, some of them are absolutely rapid. But yeah, I think you can like configure it. Might be in here somewhere.
You don't figure out what's going on in 100 minutes.
Yeah, like
I mean, a bit tough, you know.
yeah, there'll be something in there that basically allows you to. Might be in there'll be like a setting in here somewhere that basically you can configure it to say run at half speed for the video or something like. It might do it by default. I can't remember. But yeah, you can change like the default command timeouts. You can say like wait 16 seconds to find this element on the page. But obviously, if you wanted to speed your tests up, just reduce that thing down to like 5. And say if you can't find it in 5 seconds, it's probably not there unless there's a API request. But the API request it'll wait for the API to finish anyway. So yeah, and you can do retries. You can say try it 3 times. If it still fails, then fail the test. There's some really useful things, but the great thing with Cypress is it doesn't need to just be used for end-to-end testing. Like we saw when we set it up, you can add component tests in it as well. So if you just want to hammer the hell out of an end-to-end test, like to have a component with different properties and all that kind of stuff, you can just component test as well. It doesn't have to just be end-to-end. So it's a really useful tool. If anyone said to me like what automation tool would you use for JavaScript, then 100% I'd use Cypress. But you can plug it into anything. Like if you wanted to, you could plug it into Google. You say I want to test Google, like just type in google.com, and then you've got your base URL. But yeah, we could try to go to google.com now, but that's not the base URL. It's the other one. So yeah, that's Cypress. I hope you found it useful. Hope you've learned something. Hope you go off and start trying to hack various websites and feel a bit of a. It always feels like a bit like you're a bit of a hacker when you're using Cypress because you're just like automating loads of stuff. I mean, I wrote a Cypress script once to go through and delete all my LinkedIn messages, and I got banned from LinkedIn for like I think it's 2 weeks because they basically said I was spamming their API. Because all I was doing is going into my messages and then finding elements and saying, right, click, delete. And they picked up that my IP was basically just pinging their server to say like, delete. So I got a message from them and they said like, oh, you've been basically misusing the API or something. And they basically blocked me for like 2 weeks because I had to like explain to them like, no, I'm just trying to get rid of you don't have a delete all option on your LinkedIn messages. So I made my own. And yeah, so yeah, don't do that. But yeah, hope you found it useful and you've learned something. And as I say, if you ever want me to do any more sessions on Cypress or anything like that, like definitely just give me a shout. I love Cypress. My last company, they use Selenium, and I basically spent 3 months converting their entire Selenium package to Cypress. And I got their, put it this way, their Selenium, because they had so many awaits, just arbitrary await values, it ran for 2.5 days. They'd click start and it would run for 2.5 days. This massive data analytics system, I came along and converted it all to Cypress, and it then ran in 45 minutes. And that's just because of the power of the way it can look out for stuff and handles asynchronous requests so much better. And that's a claim to fame, getting it down for 2.5 down to 45 minutes. But that just shows you the power of it. So, yeah, cool.